what's the option that older folks use, or people who are not digital nomads, to retire in Spain?
So the non-lucrative visa, as it's called, it's what we often in-house refer to as the self-sufficiency visa. Basically, just prove that you have enough money to support yourself in the country. That number is...
Hi everyone, welcome to another Overseas Living Unlimited webinar, and thanks for being here today. My name is Sophia, and I'm the editorial director at Live and Invest Overseas. And this week, once again, we have on the line Kat Kalashian, who's our special products manager and Europe expert at Live and Invest Overseas. So thank you, Kat, for coming back on. She was on last month, in case you missed it. But we're super excited to have you here again today.
Thank you. Excited to talk about Valencia.
So Kat and I are here to speak about Valencia, which is Spain's third biggest city. It's found on the east coast of the Iberian Peninsula in Spain. And Kat covered it in depth in our October issue of Overseas Living Letter. And from your description, Kat, what stood out to me is that Valencia is famous for its architecture, not just modern architecture, but ancient as well. So you said to walk through the city is to see 2,000 years of history, from the medieval Islamic era to futuristic works that look like settings from sci-fi films. And it has this effortless way of blending uber modern with ancient, which to me sounds really interesting. And it's not something you get in every old world city. A lot of these cities are stuck in time, and you don't get a lot of the modern architecture. So I haven't been myself. I'm excited to learn a lot more about it. Okay, so first things first, what brought you to Valencia? Why were you there?
Well, it was a bit of a roundabout trip. I was invited to go to a new location in southern France, and it kind of worked out that we also needed to check out some real estate opportunities and some agricultural opportunities in Spain. And I decided to plan for myself this grand tour, driving from southern France, or kind of near Toulouse, if you're familiar with the geography, mid-southern France, not necessarily southern France. And I drove through the Pyrenees down to Zaragoza, which is kind of in the middle of the absolute farthest east part of the country, and then down to the coast. I skipped over Barcelona because I'm pretty familiar with Barcelona, so I didn't need to hit that again. But I hadn't been to Valencia since 2007, so obviously it's been quite some time. And I wanted to get a feel for it again, remind myself what it was all about and see how it had changed. In fact, I don't actually think it's changed nearly as much as Barcelona has in the same amount of time, for example. But from there, I continued my journey through Spain and headed over as far as Murcia, which is a couple hours south of, southwest, I guess, of Valencia. So it kind of was just one stop on a very long trip, but it was my goal. It was kind of one of the centerpieces of the trip, and a place that I really wanted to see again. And I had some friends who were visiting there at the time, so it was nice to catch up with them on the same days they were there. So I've stuck it in, but I made sure that it was kind of top of my priority list for getting to know, because it is Spain's third city, as it were, and it's been receiving accolade after accolade in the past, even 2 years, but I would say about 5 years, maybe. It's just been really, really gaining momentum as a internationally well-known city, from its green ideas, initiatives, its sustainability and eco-friendly initiatives, to its culinary scene, to being named one of the most friendly and user-friendly, I think, expat cities, named by Internations, which is a very, very large global community of expats across the world. So it's really been making a name for itself. And you mentioned the architecture, which I mentioned this in my issue, right? As well as, you'll go through these medieval walls that used to be a former part of the fortress of the city. But all the way at the other end of the city, it feels like you've landed on Mars. And in fact, a lot of this architecture is often used in futuristic or sci-fi movies. So Tomorrowland was a really big Disney movie done, when it was done, a while ago, more than 5 years ago, I think. And they used that setting as the basis of this Tomorrowland. And like they're just, I don't know, I think like half a dozen movies have used it as a setting for the future. So it really is bizarrely alien, as well as being so much what you expect of a European city, which, as you say, is very odd in Europe. You don't get a lot of futuristic or modern architecture. So it's a very, very unique feeling city.
I feel that that's true of Spain in general. Like it's very quirky. There's
Yes.
always something that you don't expect, and it's like surprisingly cutting edge when you aren't expecting it, and it kind of just blows your mind. I've had that experience in the north of Spain recently, like just stumbling upon I guess it was a vineyard with like a really famous architecturally just amazing wine house. Just thinking like this is in the middle of nowhere and no one knows about it, and it's just mind-boggling that Spain just has so many of these sort of hidden gems, but they're not hidden. Obviously, they're in films and stuff, but I don't think the average person really knows about them.
Yeah, for sure. I would totally agree. There are just so many little unsecret secrets. I don't know how else to put it, but yeah, a lot of people would never be able to say, oh, I reckon, like so many people, if a place, a film, TV show was supposed to be showing Manhattan, everybody would know immediately, oh, that's meant to be Manhattan. So much of Spain, though, you would never ever guess, oh, that's Spain, that's Barcelona, whatever.
So one thing I was curious about, what is the climate like and what sort of temperatures can you expect in Valencia?
Northern Spain is famous for having a completely different climate thanks to the effects of the ocean and the Bay of Biscay. And because on this southern/eastern coast of Spain, it's kind of protected. It's on the Mediterranean, so it's not subject to really harsh climates in either direction. It's a pretty temperate place all year round. There's never a lot of wind, never a lot of precipitation. There's a steady amount throughout the year, but just nothing very extreme in either direction. So it's funny, actually, one of the expats that I spoke with who was from Atlanta, his family was, born and bred in Atlanta, Georgia. And I asked him about the weather in winter, like January, February, how cold will it get? What, like if you were telling somebody who's coming to visit what to pack for a January, February trip, he would say, a light jacket. You'd probably want at a certain time. You might want a hat occasionally, especially if you're on a bike or something. But he said, them personally, having come from Atlanta, he thought, he has two sons. They were going out in shorts and t-shirts in January and February, occasionally with like a windbreaker just in case it rained or something. But he said they felt so much judgment from the local population because people would come up to them on the street and chastise them as parents for not dressing their children warmly enough for winter. And he's like, it's 65 degrees. This is totally a normal temperature for shorts and a t-shirt. Personally, I might wear a little more than that in 65-degree weather, but it depends on what kind of climate you're used to. So he said it was absolutely temperate. He would never recommend that you would need anything like a parka or insulated pants or anything like that at any time of year. But if you're a local, you will notice the difference. Locals will dress more warmly in the wintertime. So it's a bit of a matter of perspective, but I will say, although it never really gets that cold, it does get pretty warm. July and August are not super brutally hot. There are much, much hotter parts of Spain. Seville is known for being just brutally hot, and the sun is kind of unrelenting. Even Barcelona, which is much farther north, I've been there in August, and you're sweating when you're walking down the street, or even just standing on the street, you break a sweat. But it's not anything, not anything that's gonna, it's not like you have to put out a heat stroke warning or anything.
So just generally speaking, would you rate Valencia as a safe place? I know, like Barcelona, for instance, Madrid, they can have issues with petty crime, like pickpocketers. There's some advanced pickpocketers.
Yes.
Most of the world. How does Valencia stack up against them?
In fact, that's one of the things that every expat that I spoke with living in Valencia mentioned, the fact that they felt so safe, and that in one case, the reason that one chose Valencia over Barcelona was for the instances of petty crime. And I felt very safe in Barcelona too, but there were definitely certain parts of town in Barcelona where after dark, you definitely are keeping an eye on your purse. If you're on the public transportation and you're making sure that you're not leaning too close, or somebody isn't leaning too close to you to slip a hand in. I mean, I live in Paris, where I've been pickpocketed here before. I've seen it done a dozen times over. But I felt completely safe in Valencia. I did talk to one expat who said he had his phone stolen, but he completely blamed himself for it. And I blame myself for when I got my phone stolen on the metro in Paris. Usually when you're pickpocketed, it's you not paying attention, right? So he said he was walking down the street, probably past 2 a.m. in the morning, and he just had his phone in his hand, walking down, texting or talking to somebody, and just some kid ran by, snatched it out of his hand, kept running. So, petty crime happens everywhere, but the fact that this is, like I said, such a neighborhoody feeling city, it has these kind of closed in feelings where, it's not like Barcelona, where it's just one giant metropolis filled with millions of people. It's a very small population. A lot of people even said they wouldn't hesitate to leave their valuables on their beach towel when they go into the water, which in Barcelona you would never, ever, ever do. You make sure you lock everything up tight, or somebody's always sitting on the towel with everything, to make sure that nobody walks by and takes stuff from your blanket. So I got great reports about it, and I definitely never felt unsafe. And I mentioned this, and it's hardly even worth mentioning, but Spain has been called out for crimes against women, kind of sexually aggressive crimes in the past. Pamplona was one of the really bad places a few years ago. There was a pretty bad incident there, but since that incident, they've really taken it on as a kind of pet project, is a weird way of saying it, but like they really care about it now. Like it kind of brought to light this issue of machismo in a very machismo society. And so more than ever, I think people are really, really aware of keeping women safe and making sure women feel safe, which I am very appreciative of as a woman traveling alone. So I've been to Pamplona since that incident, and I never felt unsafe. So, it is something that maybe you'll read about if you're, on the message boards, or if you're reading past news about Spain. But I would say that it's not necessarily as much of a concern, definitely, as it used to be. And I would say just, be smart when you're alone.
True, anywhere.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it sounds like from the people you've mentioned so far, there's a good expat community, a good sized expat community, and mixed demographics.
Yeah.
Would you say that's the case? Where are most people coming from, and is there a good mix?
For sure, lots of expats, lots of Brits always in Spain. I would say that's probably the majority, but increasingly Americans as well. So one of the expats that I spoke with, he's been there for I think 3 years now, and he said 2 years ago he had never heard an American accent on the street, even among tourists, which I'm sure is a bit of an over exaggeration, but he's making the point that nowadays, half the English he hears seems to be American. So. Whether it's tourism or expats, Americans have really caught on to Valencia, and I do think a part of that is the fact that it is such a smaller city than Barcelona or Madrid. It's much less intimidating, much less overwhelming, and the crime rates are practically nil.
And what about like speaking of language, accents, etc.? What do you think about learning Spanish? Do you think it's a requirement for the city, or could you get by without it?
In Valencia, I do think you're going to want to learn Spanish, but to also put that in perspective, many of the families that have moved there without knowing Spanish originally. You'll want to make an effort, go to the schools, take the classes, but people are going to be helpful. Nobody is going to ostracize you because you don't speak it perfectly off the bat. The one expat family I mentioned from Georgia, he said it's a little humbling. It's more than a little humbling because their two sons are learning it at the same time as their parents. The two sons are basically fluent already, and the parents are using the kids as translators, which I will say that was my life growing up here in Paris. My brother and I were the translators for my parents, and when we go to the doctors or when we had a government appointment or something. So be patient with yourself, have some grace with yourself, and do the best you can. But I do think you should make a good effort here.
And Spanish, despite all the regional accents and different languages in Spain, I think Spanish is more user friendly, or one of the most user friendly languages out there that you can learn.
Yeah.
Plus, it's always an opportunity. Like, it's an opportunity to have a new hobby. It gives you something to do, to meet new people, take language classes, meet other recent arrivals who are learning the language. So it is an opportunity as well as a challenge.
And it's one of the best brain exercises. They say it's like one of the top things to do to combat dementia or, any kind of brain malfunction. Just keeps your brain young, to keep it flexible and keep it learning new things. So I definitely agree. And I totally agree. Spanish is one of the easier languages to learn. Just beware if you're using Duolingo or Rosetta Stone or one of these packages. Make sure you're learning Spain Spanish, not Mexico Spanish, Argentinian Spanish, whatever it is. Make sure it's Castilian.
Right. Good tip. It sounds like in terms of infrastructure, Valencia is super impressive. So you mentioned highways, public transportation, metro, etc. Would you say that infrastructure is going to be an upgrade for a lot of people? Like, is it that well connected? How would you rate the infrastructure in general?
Yeah, I would say it's on par with any, average American city, except that its public infrastructure or public transportation infrastructure is definitely better than most of the US, which is true of most European cities, simply because they're more compact, and it's easier to connect a smaller city and cities in smaller countries to other cities in that same country than it is across the US, which is obviously a massive place compared to what we're talking about in Spain. But, the electricity, you're never going to suffer a blackout or anything. You're not going to have flickering lights like you might in some parts of Latin America. The internet is great, super reliable. This is definitely a digital nomad haven. And Spain even has a digital nomad visa, if that is of interest to anyone. So I wouldn't ever say that infrastructure would be something to concern yourself with.
And having driven around, would you say you'd want a car if you're living there, or would you be able to get by without one?
I would say you probably wouldn't want one, unless maybe, your apartment had a parking space included, which would make life a bit easier. And you really wanted to drive around the surrounding areas. But I would say I wouldn't recommend a car here, as I would say for Paris, it would almost be a hassle. It would be an added expense that you don't need, and your overall day-to-day budget will just plummet without a car. It happened for my husband and I after moving from Panama. We estimated that our cost of living, like on an annual budget basis, went down maybe 20 to 25% without a car. So, the public transportation is great. It's really cheap. It's better than having a car, basically. So unless you're thinking that you're going to go out on lots of road trips to the countryside all the time, then I would say it's unnecessary.
I believe Spain is also one of the best connected countries in the world for its rail network, like passenger rail. So you can also get around the whole country pretty easily, which I'm like you, Kat, where I'm not really too keen on driving. So that's really amazing to me that I could go from, for instance, we're talking about Seville to Valencia to Madrid to Barcelona and never get behind the wheel. Yeah. I think that's great. And I think maybe for a lot of North Americans, they don't realize how nice that is.
Yeah, how easy it can be to live without a car. Yeah, agreed. Because any place that you want to go, you could get there in the same amount of time or faster by rail. So to go to Barcelona, to go to Malaga, even to Portugal, to Lisbon, up to Madrid. The exception is going completely across the country up to the North Coast. That's, I don't know, like 8+ hours to get all the way up there. But a flight using, one of these low-cost airlines can be, less than 50 euros and takes an hour or less to get up to Bilbao or Oviedo. So really no need for it. Oh, and also to get out of the country. So one of my favorite rail trips that I've ever taken was from Barcelona to Montpellier, because the rail line goes just across the Mediterranean. I mean, it's parallel to the coastline the entire way. So it's about a 3-hour train, if I remember correctly. And you're just watching the Mediterranean go by the whole time. It's a lovely ride. And so it's really, from Valencia, it would only be an extra couple of hours to go all the way into Montpellier. And from there, you've got all of France at your fingertips.
Amazing.
Cool thing, actually, speaking of getting around on pennies, Spain has a year-long rail pass. It's 400 euros. That's just unlimited across the country, which I think is a fantastic deal. I just discovered this when I was writing the Valencia issue, I think, which just seems like such a cool thing, just for 400 euros a year. And you can pick up and go whenever you want. You have to reserve your ticket, but it's, you have the whole country at your fingertips for the entire year.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. And I think they're also really good about like senior discounts. So if you are a retiree, you could look into that as well. I read some sort of stat, and don't quote me on it, but it was something like for a period of time, public transportation in Madrid was just free if you're over the age of, say, 65. So they do have a lot of incentives like that. It's worth looking into.
Yeah, no, that's true. For Valencia as well, when I was looking up all the costs of the various public transportation passes, the over 60 or over 65 pass was always like half the price of a normal one.
All right. Well, we're coming up almost on our time. But before we wrap up, maybe we'll just hit our two kind of big important categories. So one of them is residency. And you mentioned there's a digital nomad visa for Spain. But what's the option that older folks use, or people who are not digital nomads, to retire in Spain?
So the non-lucrative visa, as it's called, it's what we often in-house refer to as the self-sufficiency visa. Basically, just prove that you have enough money to support yourself in the country. That number is, I just had it up. I think it's about $2,500. So it's not the lowest. It's definitely not among the lowest. France is, for example, is much lower than that, the minimum requirement. But it is, as long as you have that in some kind of pension, or in fact, it's not even a monthly income, it's an annual income. So if you can just prove, I think it's 28,800, something like that. So maybe 29,000 a year that you're making, and that's what gets you in the door. So other than that, it's just all the normal stuff, the background check, put in the application, you have to apply before you leave home. You land in the country, you have a month to trade in your passport visa for your identity card. You can renew that every 2 years. Well, sorry, the first one you have to renew after a year, and then after that for 2 years. After 5 years, you can become a permanent resident, which is then valid for 10 years. And there are some in-country requirements. They're a little bit complicated, but basically, while you're a temporary resident, you can't be out of the country for more than 6 consecutive months, which seems doable to me. And it even means that you could feasibly remain tax non-resident. This gets a little bit complicated, maybe a little bit more than we want to get into here, but it means that you could actually own a place, spend 6 months a year in Spain, and as long as you spent 6 months of the year outside of the country and you're remaining compliant with all of these various things, you wouldn't have to pay your Spanish taxes, or you wouldn't be subject to Spanish taxes. Once you become a permanent resident, you can't leave the country for more than 12 consecutive months. So again, very easy to comply with, generally speaking. Other than that, they also have their golden visa option, which I think is 500,000 for real estate. It can be into 2 properties, which is convenient. So if you wanted to buy a home for yourself and then buy one to rent out, you could, be making a little bit of money off of this while getting kind of not free residency. Obviously, you're paying for it, but you're getting your residency, and then as an extra added bonus, you could be earning rental income. There are other ways to qualify for that. There are, I think, 3 other ways, making investments in the country, buying bonds, CDs, things like that. But the most popular, of course, is buying real estate, because it's more useful than just spending your money instead of putting it into a bank there. Or starting a Spanish company. That was one of the other options.
Okay, perfect. And then, so the last thing I wanted to touch on was healthcare. And that kind of relates to residency, because I believe once you become a resident of Spain, you can access the healthcare system either free or at a very, very subsidized rate.
Yes, once you're a permanent resident, that's a
permanent resident. Okay, got it. Did you get any information or hear any anecdotes about experiences with the Spanish health system?
Yeah, hands down, great rave reviews. It is seventh best in the world, according to the World Health Organization. I always like to put that in perspective. The US is 38 and Canada is 30. So even though Canada is very proud of its system, it's still ranking pretty low compared to most countries in Europe. Everyone that I spoke to was extremely happy with it, and right, it's a bit complicated because a lot of the Brits I spoke with were pre-Brexit Brits, which meant they got access to the healthcare system kind of all-inclusive because they were European citizens. That's all changed now. They're all in the same boat as us now, as poor Americans having to apply for healthcare. But in fact, the one family that I spoke of from Atlanta, they said the only downside to it is that they feel they've underused it, or they feel like they probably are underusing it because of the language barrier. So it is possible to find English speaking doctors, but you'll have to seek them out. It's not that you can just assume every doctor will speak English. And, it is a new system. It is a new thing that you've got to wrap your head around. So while it's not complicated by any means, it can be intimidating. I've experienced this in Panama, in France even. I speak French fluently, but I still found the healthcare system intimidating when I first moved here. So he said probably the only downside of it is that they feel like they could be making more use of it. If they were more comfortable, if they spoke Spanish better, that they would use it more. On the other hand, one of the British expats I spoke with said, who does speak Spanish to be fair, said that he uses it all the time. He's had small and big things dealt with locally, very, very happy with it all.
When I was doing research in a different part of Spain last year, and speaking to lots of expats and locals as well, and they had full faith in the healthcare system, and they were really happy with the services it provided for all age groups. So I think it's safe to say that you'll get an upgrade by moving to Spain, and also a discount at the same time on your healthcare options. All right, well, I think we can leave it here for today. And if anyone else has any follow-up questions, you can feel free to send them over to me. Thank you, Kat, for being here today and for sharing all your Valencia insights. It's been great to have you on the line, and I'm sure you'll be back sometime soon.
Won't be too long, I'm sure.
Thank you to everyone for being here, and I will see you at the next one.
Bye.